Hi, welcome to my podcast where I talk to strong, successful women about their stories. We talk about things that matter. We get real, we get authentic, and we get raw. We talk about leadership, self-doubt, motherhood, the journey from going from an employee to a founder or a business owner, and everything else in between. So tune in, subscribe, and if you want to work with me as your business mentor or career coach, all the details are below. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we have the unstoppable Sophie Robertson, who I'm very excited to talk to. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about Sophie. Sophie's based in Brisbane now, but she started her career in investment banking, eventually becoming an executive, working across Sydney and London. She then transitioned to the technology industry and is now the partner and head of investor relations at 1013 with the famous Steve Baxter from Shark Tank, if you don't know the VC world, where she leads capital formation, distribution, and customer relations for over 500 limited partners. That's a lot. Wow. 1013 invests in early technology companies, not just in Australia, but globally as well. Very cool. Welcome, Sophie.
It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Look, you are one of the rare gems in the investment world, in the venture capital world, where you're a woman and you're a partner. And I love this. Like, I think it's really inspiring for the rest of us. So I just want to hear a bit about your journey to get to where you are right now. And I'd love to hear a bit more about some of the challenges that you experienced as well.
For sure. Do you want me to go back to the beginning? Because I guess
Wherever you want to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in the VC world just the past 4 years. My prior life, which is like how I like to describe it, was straight out of university. I got a job at like a big investment bank, Credit Suisse.
Yeah.
Spent 15 years. It was also a very male-dominated industry. It was finance. I was in public markets or equities, covering big institutional clients and covering listed stocks. So I did that in Sydney and London. And then I ultimately moved back to Australia. And I was back in Australia for about 5 years, working with Credit Suisse still. And then I was a director at that stage and, trying to work out what my next move was. 15 years into like a pretty awesome career. Like, it's a fabulous place to be and to start, but I was sort of itching for the what next.
Yeah.
And having lived in London and having covered Asian markets, I could see like technology sectors and, which were much, much larger in those regions of the world compared to what was in Australia. They just excited me. They were fast growth. They were like changing the future, creating new categories. And I just thought, like, back in Australia, like, where am I going to find this? So I spent like a year or two with Credit Suisse where I was helping them sort of spearhead like tech conferences. At the time, technology stocks listed on the ASX were essentially Computershare, like a share registry, and Iris, which is kind of like Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And, maybe things like car sales and Seek, etc. But it wasn't like the new cloud type software, like SaaS businesses that were sort of taking off in the US and Asia. So I kind of ultimately had to like dip into the private world and start like building out my network and my relationships in VC to go find where the tech companies were. And we did like a few conferences at Credit Suisse, and through that process, got exposed to what was happening here in Australia and just kind of loved what I saw.
Yeah.
So I met some amazing people at like some of the best funds in Australia, and they spoke at our conferences. And then I just sort of thought like, maybe that's where my next leg is. Like, banking's amazing, public markets are great, but there was sort of a takeover from like computers are doing a lot more of it than they used to. And like in the world of AI, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I ultimately decided 15 years in, like, had a great crack, was ready to sort of like get out of my comfort zone again and try something new. So I did a few things all in conjunction, but essentially I quit my job. I did an MBA. I did this online during COVID with like a US MBA school. I'd always wanted to do one. And then probably the most transformative in me springboarding from big corporate banking world into where I am now was doing the StartMate Women's Fellowship.
Lovely.
So I was one of the early cohorts in 2020. Did it with another amazing like 100 women who are all powerhouses, all also going through quite a transition. And yeah, just kind of that gave me the language to understand what VCs were, what the various roles were, and where I might sort of ultimately fit in. I actually thought I wanted to work in a tech company. Thought I wanted to be operational. You know, being in banking, it's quite advisory. You ultimately aren't making the decision. You're advising your clients. They're making the decisions. I was like, I want to be in a business. I want to roll up my sleeves. I actually want to do something. But through like this 3-month program, met heaps of amazing people, worked out I wanted to relocate career-wise to Brisbane, and then I wanted to leverage my experience in investing markets. And so ultimately, everyone I spoke to said you've got to meet the team at 10:13. And I met them, and yeah, it's kind of, they were like perfect hybrid at the time. They were 1 year old. They were a startup in their own right. You know, they were sort of creating a new category in Australia, which is like the deal by deal model. But, you know, it was all about financial products, which is essentially the opportunity to invest in technology at the earliest of stages.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it came to be.
That's fantastic. And it's interesting. It sounds like you did actually get to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty because 1013 was so young in a sense. So there would have been a lot of systems and things you had to build when you
Yeah,
were in there.
the team had been together for a little while prior, like working in Steve's family office, but the business pretty much launched at the end of 2019 and I joined in early 2021. I'd say like the first year and a half was pretty bonkers. It was like the peak of, you know, the zero interest rate environment, all the VC tech investing was going gangbusters. We're having like 50 people on board a month. And yeah, there were like a lot of deals flowing and everything. So I kind of came in at the top, and having been in markets for so long, it's so nice to be able to see a cycle. And I can now say I've definitely seen a cycle.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it was really good to sort of get in there and help scale the business in this hyper growth period. And then, you know, now doing a lot of consolidation and optimizing.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I'm curious, so it's traditionally pretty hard to get into the venture capital industry, especially in the technology field. Like, what are some of the challenges you experienced, and how did you kind of overcome them?
Yeah, so I think I was probably blessed in the sense of having an investment background. And my role, just to make it clear for everyone, is I'm not in the deal team, like living and breathing and picking stocks. I'm on the side where I'm working with our LPs or our limited partners and helping collect the capital to invest in the startups. But you also need to be able to like communicate the opportunities and on that distribution side of what we do. And I think I
Yeah.
was pretty blessed, having spent 15 years in investment markets, to sort of have the financial foundations to sort of speak the language. And I guess also like, yeah, to sort of take other investors on that journey and I guess understand the other asset classes they could invest in.
Yeah.
I'd say VC is very relationship driven.
Hmm.
So I think a challenge for me, and probably still a challenge for me, is, you know, like I don't know everyone. There's so many VCs in Australia now. There was this amazing list on LinkedIn the other day, sort of highlighting all the female VCs that are partners in Australia, and I couldn't believe how many of them I haven't yet met.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think it's hard building a network in a new industry, in a new field from scratch. But
Yes.
for me, I guess I was lucky having leveraged the StartMate community and having my mentor or coach at the time, Matt Allen, sort of help connect a few dots for me.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, probably drawing on a few people in my old universe who'd also crossed over into tech and VC.
Yeah.
But certainly not easy once you've been so established in another area.
Yeah.
Some of the other challenges are probably, everyone talks about pattern matching, you know, like,
Hmm.
so
What do you
how do you get
mean?
yourself in the deal flow where you're seeing everything so that you know, like, yes, that might have a chance, or no, I've already seen 10 of those. So that's not my day job, but it's so important to me being able to communicate to our LPs why something might get up and other things not. And so just
Yeah.
really getting myself in the flow of the investment deal team and being able to communicate that story and our thesis, you know, correctly and with proper insight.
Yeah, because that would be quite tricky because you're working with investors who are not necessarily from the technology field, presumably. So they might not fully understand the thesis of a technology investment and what some of the lingo means even. I mean, if you don't, you have to keep up with the things changing every couple of weeks, really. So yeah. having to then communicate to say, hey, we are taking care of your money. Like, this is why we chose this and we didn't choose this. Yeah, that would be challenging, I can
Just
imagine.
having the bigger context, which, yeah, our team lives and breathes it, but just being able to like translate that and sort of
Yeah.
extract that from them effectively. But yeah, you just sort of, there's lots of osmosis that happens. So a bit of time on the ground helps as well.
Yeah. And the VC industry as a whole in Australia is relatively young, I think. So that's one advantage of perhaps going back to what you're saying about relationships and not having those relationships. In a sense, you're going to be one of the veterans in a
Yeah.
couple of decades, right? Like people are like,
Yes.
oh, some of the early VC people in Australia is like Sophie and Matt Allen and all of these. So I think that's quite cool too. You're sort of, I just had this thought that you're helping shape an industry that in the grand scheme of things is relatively young, if you know what I mean, like 20, 30 years, really, not even that, probably
Most
less than
people
20
sort of
years.
go back to like the early teens and like, the Blackbird First Fund. Is that sort of like the wave of the new VC wave? I know there were other VCs that tried in previous cycles, but that's sort of where this wave started. And I think the beautiful thing about Australia now is we're getting like the offspring, we're having some big success stories and people that have gone on that journey sort of spinning out, starting new companies. And we're getting that really nice, lovely momentum happening on both the founder side, but then also the investor side.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed that, yeah, my favorite people are investors who've also come out of startups. We're the ones that are excited to say, I want to invest in other startups and I want to see them succeed. And I understand it. So I want to help as well. So yeah, there's just like a new breed of investors who've come out of ex-Canva and Google and all of these places that can now actually give back and help out.
Totally. And that's where all the magic, and that's like one of the main reasons I'm attracted to this world is because you meet so many incredible people who know how hard it is to build a technology business from scratch, which is hyper growth and taking over the world. And they genuinely want to help. They've kind of gone on their own journey. They're an expert at something and they know they can sort of add like some value and they're willing to do that. And I just truly love that pay it forward mentality that really permeates throughout the entire like Aussie VC space. I hope it lasts.
Yeah, this is it, isn't it? As things get bigger, it can tend to get a bit more competitive. But I mean, I used to live in San Francisco, and I hear similar stories in SF as well. They just become little tribes, little cohorts that then appear that they're still helping each other, but they might have now come out of a certain industry of startups rather than the entire landscape. Whereas we're so young, it's still the entire landscape. But I also want to hear a bit about, we discussed this a little bit yesterday, so I'm kind of preempting this, but I imagine your position is very demanding. So I want to hear about your philosophy for managing stress and situations you can't control, because I feel like as you get more senior, to any women or men listening to this, what I've noticed is that you've got to get more comfortable with things you can't control and managing stress and decisions. Like as you get more senior, you make more decisions that have more impact on people's lives, and sometimes they're wrong. So yeah, I'm just curious, what's your philosophy for managing all of that?
A good question. I don't think I've completely nailed it yet. And I
Lifetime,
don't know
right?
that I don't know
Yeah.
that anyone ever does, but I think from like a personal level, I think I'm becoming a bit more in tune with what makes me tick, what keeps me happy, and how to get the best version of myself showing up every day. And so without a doubt, like I need to exercise. So if I don't sort of like squeeze some sort of like sweat out of me in like a daily process, then I just kind of get frustrated. I don't have great attention span. I'm not attentive in meetings. I'm just not sort of showing up as like the best version of myself. So I try really hard to like pull that off, and I don't get it every day, but my husband and I sort of help each other slot that in and make it work from like the family perspective. And, I do little things like combine my commute with exercise, and it's like two birds, one stone. I'm
Yeah.
always looking for efficiencies. So I
Yeah.
think that's really good. I think I've also worked out I'm a lot more productive in the morning. I literally turn into a pumpkin. Like if you're expecting me to log in at night, I couldn't log on at like 8 or 9 p.m. and get stuff done. I'd happily wake up at 2 a.m. and punch stuff out for the next 6 hours, like no problem. But
Wow.
there's just like my body clock, I just have worked out. I'm never going to make that work. So just kind of having that awareness and knowing how I can manage that and sort of accommodate it and still get what I need to done.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like stress, I think I just kind of know like what I want to expect, like managing expectations as well. I think lots of people have really big, hairy, audacious goals, and I think that's amazing. I think I'd probably set myself smaller targets, more realistic targets, and then
Mm.
I'm constantly just checking in with what I call expectation management. So you're only going to be disappointed if like your expectations are completely out of kilter. So it's partly like a communication piece. You know, if you're sort of thinking your boss is sitting over you and you're stressed because there's a meeting upcoming, like just, you know, I'll try and have a check-in ahead of time and try and close that gap and make sure, you know, that I'm not working myself up for no reason.
Mm.
Always just try and like level things out that way. So I think, yeah, that's certainly one thing I approach.
I like it. I like how your approach is very measured. And I always hear about exercise and sleep being really, really critical, but I think it takes us a few years to work out the rhythm of what we really want from it. I feel like when I was younger, I was doing a lot of things competitively and only for those reasons. But then as I'm older, I'm like, oh, I actually enjoy doing these things, and it actually makes me feel good, and be more productive, be a better partner, mother, work, all of these things. So your reasons change, and therefore I feel like your boundaries are clearer.
Totally. Like I used to swim. So I spent my childhood training 4 hours a day. And everyone's like, how could you stare at a black line like that? And I'm like, it's so long ago, I can hardly remember, but I don't ever remember not loving it. And I swim now, but it's only in the past year or two that I work out that that's actually my meditation time. Like that's
Mm.
me clearing my mind, literally thinking about breathing, literally thinking about turns. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing else happening in my head. And
Yeah.
it's actually like so rare to get that.
Yeah, and literally the definition of mindfulness, you cannot easily think about other things because you actually forget to stop breathing and you forget, you like start drifting across the lane. It's you have to actually focus on what you're doing.
Yeah.
My daughter and I found puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, and over the holidays. We're
Yes.
obsessed with it, and it's such a wonderful example of we're really using our brain. We work as a team. Like we've figured out the skills she's good at the jigsaw part and what I'm good at. So we work as a team. And every time we're bored, we just go to the dining table and we start doing a bit more of the puzzle. And it's all of that dopamine, it's all in there. So it's kind of like finding what fits for you. And
Yeah, I think
yeah,
everyone should have a jigsaw puzzle going at all times. Like there's so, there's
totally.
something really like quite nice like on the social side of it, but also like the solo side of it, it can go either way.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love it. And sleep, I have to mention this because I think after becoming a mother, I've realized I've become a morning person, and it's taken me a few years to actually be okay with it. And now I'm very good about saying, "Hey, look, I'm not going to say yes to that dinner because by the time we eat, it's going to be 8:30, and I really like to be in bed by 8:30." So,
Right.
so I'm like, "Can we meet for a coffee? Can we not have a drink?" It's like I just love I wake up at 5 in the morning. I love my 3 to 4 hours or I get to do whatever I want. I try not to look at my phone.
Yeah.
Just now I'm noticing I really need to protect these things because that's what makes me a better human being the rest of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I'm blessed and I just hope it lasts forever because I sleep probably 8 hours a night. And, sort of once every 2 months when I don't, like it really impacts you. And a lot of people just don't get that. So I've got to just protect that while I can.
Yes, definitely. Okay, changing gears a little bit. So I want to speak a little bit about women and startups. I mean, I know you're not directly on the deal flow, but you're in amongst it. I think I do get a lot of female founders getting confused about whether they should raise money, whether they shouldn't, how to stand out, what am I doing wrong? Like, what's your general sort of, what have you seen? Yeah, what advice do you have for women who are looking to raise?
Totally. I'll give some broad advice and then I'll see if I can come up with like some gender specific. But broadly, I'd say a really good like framing of a capital raise in VC is like knowing if the VC is actually the right money for you. So putting yourself in the VC's shoes, understanding their mandate, and understanding that they're ultimately trying to build a portfolio of moonshots that are going to return their fund like 10 times over, right? So they're really going for these like I'll talk from the 1013 perspective. We're going for globally scalable software businesses that have like awesome margins, that are globally scalable, technology at the core. And, we want these businesses to be growing 30% on month, and we're looking for the returns of like 20x. Like these are all the ideals we're chasing. And not every company's going to be that, right? So is it as a starting point? Sure, you're building a technology product, but is it going to create a new category on the global stage? And is it going to be VC backable? So just making sure you're going after the right money. In 13, we see about 100 deals a month. And let's say maybe one of them gets through. So we're saying 99 no's. So also knowing you're not alone in the no's. And you hear some awesome stories like Mel Perkins had like 1,800 meetings or whatever it was. There's a lot of no's, and just having that tenacity and persistence to say, hey, I will find the right person. Hey, I do believe in this. I'm just going to keep chipping away, and I'm not expecting a yes. And then you're going to be surprised when you do get it, right?
I like that. Not
the data and the stats, like are showing you that it's going to be a no. The edge case is a yes. So just being able to frame it that way so you can keep showing up and not doubt yourself.
Yeah.
I'd say the earlier you are in your journey, like the more it is about you. So knowing, so for like 1013 had it again, I don't want to speak for all VCs, but, if we're backing a business, if it's pre-seed, generally they don't have any revenue. They might not, they might have an MVP, but we're backing them. We're backing them as the right person to bring, like be a magnet for talent. We're backing them for being the deep domain expert, the right person to solve this problem. And then obviously timing and product and vision and all these other things come into play. But the earlier you are in your journey, the more it is about you. So being able to like communicate that and portray that, like, hey, I would work for that person. Hey, she really knows her space. And all those things are like so powerful. What else might be helpful? I'd say have a really tight process with regards to the actual capital raise. And this is probably relevant for everyone.
Yeah.
There's some really good materials online or resources. I know Airtree did a really great piece with Alistair Blenken of Procure Pro, pretty much open sourcing his process and why they thought it was best in class. There's good materials you can find, but essentially it's things like having your pitch deck really clear, having your story clear, like doing it at a time when your numbers are heading in the right direction. So you're not having to explain, December was soft and, we had this transition, etc. Like just sort of lining the timing up, having your data room ready to go. And then, so you as the investor are like, oh my God, every question I've asked for, every like piece of documentation I've asked for, like everything's ready, everything's there to go. And that just sort of sets the scene for like, this person switched on, they're organized, like it's going to be really good working with them. And I'd say there's an element of like relationship building that needs to happen along the way. So essentially I see VCs investing in startups as like a bit of a marriage. It's generally like this 10-year partnership where you're on the journey together. We're incentivized for you to have a great outcome. We want to know you as much as possible. We want to know that you can tell us when things are not going in your direction. We want to be able to help. So people talk about having founders that are coachable, but, I'd say the flip side to that is like a founder says, I've spoken to 10 people and they've told me 10 different things. So how are you going to be coachable? Like which direction? So that's not an easy thing, but knowing what to lean into and what not, and just really building out your network so that when it's time to raise, you know who the right fits are, you know who you mesh with, you know who will help you.
That's really good advice. I think particularly that last point, because I think there's an assumption that you turn up for that first meeting with your deck and at the end of it, you should be able to get a yes. But it's really interesting to hear that, as with anything, it's a relationship. You build trust over time. So perhaps I suppose the first time you say no might not doesn't mean that, 3 months or 4 months, you're probably tracking that person through LinkedIn or just, I met with that person. Oh, right. So they've managed to do this milestone. Maybe I'll invest in the next round. Now they
Absolutely.
look ready. It's it's kind of I guess the takeaway I'm taking from that is see those meetings as relationship building, not necessarily like disappointing. I'm never going to get money from VC. Yeah, I just need to do a few more things. Perhaps I need to prove the market. I need to do something else.
Yeah.
Am I able to get that? That's a nice kind of, that's like a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, and those milestones are so important. If you can say, hey, I'm going to be, 150 grand of revenue, like in 3 months' time and you hit it, like either way, I think keeping people on the journey, and then being really honest and transparent about, the good, the bad, the ugly,
Yeah.
um, bring them on the journey, show that you're learning as from the good, the bad. And yeah, just don't ever burn those bridges. Just keep them alive where you can.
I think
Which is hard because founders literally are doing a million things all
so
at once.
much. Yeah. Yeah, they don't have time to have like catch ups with VCs, and one would argue they shouldn't. Like that's not what they should focus on. But also, I think people, VCs are people like you're a human being. You've got feelings, you've got needs, you get to know other people. It's not all. I think one of the other misconceptions is that it's all mats and data room, and it's yes, there's a big component of that, but also it's, do we like you? Do we trust in you? Do we think you're likable enough to attract really smart people to work for you? All of that, what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like a lot more art than science, particularly in the early stages, because there aren't like
Yeah.
numbers and data to crunch to sort of, read too much into unit economics or anything. It's,
No.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think that point you raised about know why, in a sense, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but why are you raising VC money? Know that what VC looks for is that high growth. And I think what we don't say enough to startups raising money is that it's okay not to want to be hyper growth, a unicorn, be global. Like it's okay to make a profit and just know that venture capital money, there are lots of other sources of funding that you can go for. It feels like there's so much glamour behind venture capital funding that it's like a failure almost if I don't get
yeah.
the venture capital money. But do you really want the stress of creating that business? Is that exciting or stressful? That's the question.
Absolutely. I think people need to know like where do I want this to go and am I setting myself up to like have to move to the US and that's my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Just know who you are and what you want to get out of it and make sure you're sort of matching that with the capital you're trying to get in your corner.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I kind of want to move off work now because,
Okay.
the other side of you is obviously the family and the personal and the human. You mentioned that you took 3 months off with the family to go backpacking around Asia. So I'd love to hear more about the experience and what prompted it. Was it recently?
Yes. Term 3 of 2024, so just last year, I was very fortunate to sort of steal 3 months out of my work commitments for 1013. My husband quit his job. I've got two daughters, so one is 7 and one is 9, and we're able to get them out of school for a term. And we had a dream to just sort of like put it like it was mainly for the kids. So my husband and I met in London. I've done a heap of traveling. We've done a bunch together. I love adventure. I love like getting out of your comfort zone. And so we just always knew it was something we wanted to do with the kids.
Mm,
And they're interesting ages. We're sort of heading into tween land,
yep.
where like their friends become more important than their parents. And we just really wanted to capture them before we kind of went into the next stage. So, and there was also an element of like, if you take your kid out of school, and they're in year 6 or year 8, and you
Harder.
generally have to do the work and the homeschooling. But we were able to give them life experiences and different exposure and different learning and weren't too stressed that they'd come back and not be able to slot back in. So we just had this magical window that we really were really fortunate to tap into, and everything just strangely and amazingly just lined up. And so we did 3 months backpacking through Asia. So we were in Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. And
Oh,
we went all over land, and we were sort of moving every like 3 to 7 days. We're staying in like pretty, B grade type accommodation. There was no resorts and there was not many pools and any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to expose them like to new people, new cultures, new ways of living, different languages, different food, and ultimately just give them some of the love we've both got for travel and the bigger
Yeah.
world out there.
Wow, that is truly inspiring. Any surprising moments from that trip in terms of what, you learned about your children, about each other?
So I'd say like one of my daughters was probably a little bit shyer than the others, like loves close relationships, but probably not comfortable asking the waiter for a menu or,
Yeah,
the check or something.
I've got one of those
Um,
daughters. Yep.
and so just seeing her transition over that period of just getting out of her comfort zone and just seeing, we didn't force her, but she's like, where's the bathroom? And I'm like, well, I'm not asking, you ask.
Mm,
And, she's sort of like, I really need to go. And I'm like, well, you could sort it out, just really giving her the independence and the confidence to do things she otherwise wouldn't have. And she's having to do it in a foreign language. And yeah, I think when you are in forced situations and you don't have the crutch of your family or someone holding your hand, it's amazing what you can do. So I think that was really pivotal from her self-development.
yeah.
And I think the other one was just like their ability to make friends. We might be in a place for like 2 or 3 days, and there were hardly any other young kids traveling. So, they're having to interact with like 20-year-old backpackers or, lots of local people. And they were just able to build these amazing relationships with other people they met of different nationalities, different ages. And just seeing that happen like quite naturally and organically was just really wonderful to watch. And I think it's like the more this AI world takes over, the more those social interpersonal skills are really going to matter. So I wouldn't be able to describe exactly what happened, but I just think having the opportunity to make that work was
Yeah.
really cool to watch.
That is, oh, it's so inspiring. I can imagine also the confidence it gives them. I mean, you can come back to Australia and everything's so much easier. So they have this different level of challenge and standard that they've just been exposed to. I remember this, you remind me of this little story when we went to India many, many years ago. My kids were very little, but obviously they were still seeking friends, and it was the end of the trip, and they were very used to explaining, their name and speaking to other kids who don't speak English. And we were in this hotel just before we flew out, and there were these two little kids. They looked like they were from a Western country, but both my kids and them approached each other in the playground and started talking as though the other didn't speak the language. It was really sweet. They were like, I'm, I'm Maya, Maya, my name. And the other boy was like, I'm John, John. It took about 2 minutes. And then they clicked, you're Australian. Oh my goodness, you're Australian. And these kids actually live in India. So for
Oh,
them, it's
cool.
even more, yeah, which is really cool. So, oh, you should have, it was so funny and delightful to see how they're like, oh my God, what was your experience like? What did you eat? Oh, I don't like that. It's adorable. Yeah.
Yeah, those things are just super precious to like, be a fly in the wall and see happen and how they adapt.
Yeah, we take these things for granted as adults, but from a child's perspective, very adorable. Perfect. And also, what was life like integrating back into Australia?
I was really excited to come back. 12 weeks sort of like it doesn't sound like a long time, but it moved pretty slowly over there. And I easily could have gone for another 3 months or whatever. Like I've totally got the travel bug, but it was also really wonderful to come home. I think the kids definitely miss their friends and they definitely miss routine. And you just came home with this newfound appreciation for like how clean everything is in Australia and, how everything functions and you can appreciate a paved road and just all these things you don't notice, you completely take for granted. The fact that you can drink water out of the tap and all these really like what you'd call basic necessities in Australia. It's really different in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
So just came back with like a lot of gratitude, I'd say. And then, yeah, I was super excited to get back into work, and I kind of miss the daily like catch ups with everyone and all that. So I think it was great to come home, but at the same time, it's so quick for you to just slip back into
Course.
your ways. I don't think I've done anything sort of transformational. I didn't have any epiphanies while I was away. I didn't come back thinking I need to change, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah,
But yeah, like Brisbane's an incredible place to live. Like we're very
absolutely.
lucky.
Yeah, I mean, those experiences I think gets kind of absorbed into your DNA. They're not necessarily transformative. And I think the best experiences are not necessarily transformative. They're just absorbing. Like, I don't know what the word is, but and then you just change tiny things and you have these memories. And like you said, your daughter is now more able to ask these, like, those are the little marks that it leaves that are really important.
Really. Yeah. No, we just sort of added another layer as the family of like these core memories that were so outside the box of all the other core memories we had. And even now you sort of see them sort of like go back into the archives and, mention something that happened. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's just been sort of additive.
Yeah, and my kids are 12 and 14, and they still talk about holidays they had when they were 7. And my older daughter has an incredible memory. She even remembers India.
Cool.
They even talk about it with their friends now. So it's crazy how it plays back. So that's really awesome. So, love to end on the topic of motherhood since we've been kind of towing in and out of it. I talk to a lot of women about how motherhood's changed life for them. And I've been privileged to have some conversations with late 20-year-olds, early 30-year-olds, where they're working for startups and in really good positions and really worried about the impact of motherhood on their careers and relationships. And we're not going to go into that. That'll be a whole other episode of relationships. But yeah, I'd love to hear your journey, particularly working in a pretty high powered, high achieving sort of environment, how that was for you, how you found it now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic and one I'm very happy to talk to. I so I've got two daughters. I had my first when I was 31, and I was living in the UK. So I guess I was working with Credit Suisse at the time. I was living in the UK, and I essentially had been trying to relocate back to the Sydney office and then ultimately fell pregnant. And then I said, I'm really moving back to the Sydney office now, and was very fortunate, like that my bosses and my team at the time were happy to accommodate that. I was already on the track to sort of move back, but timing, to be fair, just kept slipping.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of helped accelerate what otherwise could have slipped for another few years. Like I was in a very relationship based business. I'd built a big book of clients over there, and then you sort of step out and you start again, right? And then someone's got to come in and start from zero and fill. Like it's really hard to move around in these types of businesses. But then, yeah, I took 11 months maternity leave the first time. And I guess in my mind, I was fortunate because I was already kind of going to zero. Already
Mm.
made the decision to move countries, and then I was going to go back and start an entire new client base where there was no base level, right? So I
Yeah.
was really fortunate just the way that lined up because I was already sort of stepping out. Most people at the time were taking anywhere between 3 and 6 months leave, particularly for like a big US centric, Swiss centric type business. Mat leave's not always as generous as it is in Australia. But I was really adamant that, I'd already been at the firm more than 10 years. I was never actually like maternal or clucky, but I really wanted to
Same.
give myself a shot at it.
Yep.
And yeah, I just totally loved it. So I guess, yeah, my husband was working remotely. So he was still working European hours. So he'd work at night, and then there'd be two of us all day with this little baby. And it was just like pretty magical days. So I guess it started really well, and then I guess I went back to work for a year, and then I went on mat leave again. That's really hard.
Yeah.
So,
Because you get into a rhythm and then,
well,
yeah.
it's really hard because one, you've got a 1-year-old at home, you're working full time, and you're pregnant. It's like the triple whammy of like
Gosh,
a hurt
yeah.
locker.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely empathize. Yeah.
And then, you've just had a year off, and then you like, I didn't feel guilty at any point, but like, sort of like everyone knew it was sort of inevitable, and you just kind of have these elephant in the room the whole time.
Yeah.
The way I rationalized it and just sort of, I just looked big picture. I'm like, I've been at the firm 10 years. It's likely I'll be there another 10 years. This is going to be a blip in my career.
Wise
And,
words. Yeah.
all my clients have children and families. I think the hardest thing for like me at the time was there weren't that many females internally I could look up to and say, hey, I want to be like you. You've got a family, you've got a great career. And I
Mm,
didn't have many senior female role models I could look up to and saying, hey, you've really navigated that well. So I almost flipped it and said, hey, this is my chance to set what I think like it could look like. And I didn't get it right or perfect or anything, but to sort of give people, she's a director, she's happy to take 11 months off. The business is happy to support that
mm,
and just, create a new precedent, really. So I kind of flipped it and did it that way. And the business was amazing, super supportive. It wasn't an easy few years. I complicated it by relocating to Brisbane and then commuting to Sydney for work. And I had babies at home. Like it was all madness for a
wow.
few years.
Yeah. Wow.
But you've got like a village around you. And I had a village around me to sort of really help navigate that and make it work.
That's good.
And so I guess motherhood broadly has been incredible. I totally adore my kids. I've probably getting the opportunity, like in the past 4 years since I've left Credit Suisse, where I work 12-hour days, to probably get more time with them now. That was definitely one of the reasons why I've flipped careers.
Yeah.
And it's just, I probably missed like a few of the baby toddler years. I did a lot of daycare and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now I can be present and I can drop them at school and I can go to their shows, like, assembly performances and whatever it is, the little stuff that
Yeah.
they're around and they notice and really
Yeah.
means a lot. And I think the bigger your kids get, like the bigger their problems get. And you just kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
want to be present.
Yes.
So
Wow, that's very inspiring. I feel like you've taken some very deliberate decisions along the way as things changed and came along. And I also really like what you said about it is a blip in your entire journey. And I think when you're in it, I remember it being my whole life. I'm like, if I take, and I'll share a little my own story, which was I was at Google San Francisco and was pregnant and quite relatively young for San Francisco. I was 26, I think, when I was pregnant. So no one else at Google, the oldest person at Google, I think, was like 31 at that time. I
love
swear.
that.
So nobody was pregnant. No one knew what to do. And in Australia, rules and the laws are much stricter than in the US, as you probably are aware. They
Yeah.
give you nothing. And Google was amazing. So they did give a lot. I remember it's a long story, but cut it really short. I wanted to take 9 months maternity leave, which was unheard of. And I had to do PowerPoint presentations, explaining what a 6-month baby mother versus a 9-month baby mother, like how much sleep she gets. I think I made up half this crap, but
Yeah.
it worked because that's the only language they understood. And I had to go up to my director at that time, and Google had to change systems because insurance would be cut off at 6 months. They just had no idea to make this work. But I'm like, I'm doing
And
this.
did they?
Yes, they did it.
Well, this is it. You can move mountains, right? If it matters, and if you can, someone needs to pave, that for others to come, right? Good on you for doing that.
Yeah, and so many women afterwards. We had this wonderful anonymous mothers list, which is what I really miss even to this day. Asked like, can you share the PowerPoint presentation that you did? Like, what was it? How did you do this? Which is, I mean, I think it's sad on one level that, in Google Europe, mothers are taking 2 years off, but in Google US, like 9 months was considered long. But I agree, like if you feel strongly about it, just you can make it happen. And I definitely don't regret, like you went back to work. And but my daughters asked me the other day, they're like, Mom, why are you around so much now? But you said we were in daycare and nannies and things a lot when we were little. And they're old enough, I can be quite honest with them. And I just said,
Yes.
look, you weren't all that interesting back then. And I definitely hit a limit very soon on how much tea houses I could play with you. I really needed to work. Like that was, but now
Yeah.
I can see that, I want to be home at 3 p.m. because I don't know when it is they're going to start telling me something important, probably in their room half the time. But that, that 5 minutes
But they know
come
you're
out.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can just sit here at my dining table on my laptop and they come out and I can go, yep, laptop close. What's up? How's school?
Yeah.
What happened? So, yeah,
Yeah. No,
it's really
it's
interesting.
wonderful. It's been a really cool journey and I'm just sort of like bracing for like the next years. Every moment I'm in, I'm like, this is probably as good as it gets. So I'm just really trying to cherish it.
That's a really, yeah. And I think with also, I've noticed things that you wish would go away just happen to magically drop off. Like I'm sure you remember, like suddenly they were toilet trained or suddenly they could put their own seatbelt on. And you're like,
Just sleeping
whoa,
through the night.
yeah. All of these,
That's all you need.
oh, that felt like it took a few years. But in general, I think if I look back, I think it's just not stressing about knowing that everything will clear away. And it's quite a long journey. I mean, my mom was here a few weeks ago and she was like, she's in her late 60s and she's like, I still worry about you. That's just not going to end, apparently.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you just brace yourself. It's not those 0 to 3 years, it's like the
Life.
whole
The whole
process.
gig.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful.
So I'm looking forward to keeping in touch and seeing how our journeys evolve, parenthood and otherwise. But thank you so much for the chat today. Really, really appreciate it. Your honesty and your really, really interesting experiences. So yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Isis. Absolute pleasure and really great. I'm excited to watch all the other ones you've recorded and see who's up next.
Yes, for sure. Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed that episode. All the details from the show are in the show notes below. If you want help with any of those topics, feel free to contact me. I am your career coach and business mentor. I can help you grow your business or help you with those really difficult decisions that you might be struggling with, like, should I quit my job? Or how do I ask for a pay rise? Or should I change careers? If you're struggling with any of these things, contact me.